Stay connected to the world around you. KPBS brings you trusted news, compelling stories, and in-depth reporting every day. Wherever life takes you, KPBS is here, on the radio, online, and on the go. Discover more at kpbs.org.
Welcome in, San Diego. It's Jade Hindman. On today's show, how Trump's funding freeze could impact childcare in San Diego, plus the impact of the administration's attacks on the Somali community. This is KPBS Midday Edition, connecting our communities through conversation. So last week, 5 state attorneys, including California Attorney General Rob Bonta, sued the Trump administration for freezing roughly $10 billion in child care and family assistance funding. $5 billion of those funds are allocated to California. The freeze comes amid allegations from conservative activists of fraud in the child care industry. Well, today we're here with 2 child care experts to talk about what this could mean for families and providers here in San Diego and across the state. I'm joined now by Max Arias, chairperson of Child Care Providers United. Max, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me. Good
so
morning.
Glad to have you here.
Afternoon, sorry.
Also with us is Stacy Lee. She's the Chief Learning Officer and Senior Managing Director of Early Childhood at Children Now, a research nonprofit. Stacy, welcome to you too.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great to have you as well. Stacy, what was your initial reaction to news of the funding freeze?
One was a bit of disbelief. I think given the basis for which they made that decision, which there is none, it was very concerning that they would freeze childcare funds for children and families, which we know is vitally needed in all of our communities. And we knew, and the next, reaction was just concern. Even the idea of a temporary or intermittent pause in funding is tremendously challenging for this sector to endure because they operate in such razor-thin margins. And so we knew that this could create further challenges and vulnerability for both children, families, and workers, as well as those providers who provide care for children and families.
Max, what about you? What were your initial thoughts?
Well, similarly, I not so much disbelief as kind of waiting. What is he going to do? Because, he's been threatening withholding funds, and he did try to withhold funds of the Department of Education, funds for K through 12 schools. But disbelief, too, that anybody could be so callous as to, risk the jobs, the livelihoods of thousands of people, because there is no such thing as temporary funding freeze. It could be a temporary funding freeze, but for our members, family childcare providers, temporary could mean permanent. And if the funding is kind of stopped, that many thousands of family childcare providers probably have to close, and that impacts tens of thousands of families that have to go to work. So that was the first reaction, and just really trying to figure out how is it affecting our members and the families to serve, and what is it that we need to do at this moment.
Stacy, I do want to talk more about the specifics of this freeze and who it could impact, because I know it most directly affects families who receive subsidized child care. But talk more about that and where else these funds go to.
Sure. So relative to this proposal, in California, about 286,000 children receive subsidized childcare. And a portion of those children are receiving funds from the TANF program and CalWORKS, as well as other funds from the Child Care Development Block Grants. All of those funds are blended by providers and by other programs to make sure you could provide a full day of care for children. That's only 14% of eligible children in California who are receiving subsidies. So there's many families who are eligible but are not able to receive subsidies because there's just not enough resources available at this time. But there are, 286,000 children is a substantial number.
And a federal jump temporarily paused the freeze, and this came after the lawsuit was announced. What does that mean for, the status of the funding freeze, at least for now?
So what we know for now is that, and very important for families to hear and for providers on the ground to hear, is that nothing has changed as of now. So because of the injunction from the federal courts, there has not been a change, and they're not changing requirements or who's eligible or how the funding is flowing to providers at this time.
Max, can you talk more about the withholding of these funds, and how they could specifically affect childcare workers?
Well, as I was just saying, the family childcare providers and centers that, as Stacy mentioned earlier, are really working on razor thin margins. So, for example, for family childcare providers, the current subsidies they receive from the state only covers around half of what they have to spend to care for their child. So you can imagine if these freezes, sorry, were to happen and be effective, it could mean closure. And we saw that recently, well, a few years ago in COVID, we saw how COVID affected providers, and that really laid bare how the flaws of the system, how razor thin is. So that is, and then they serve the most vulnerable children of working families, children of essential workers, and so if this happens, it could really have a serious impact, not only in people's lives, but in the providing of care in the state of California.
Mm. Well, and Stacy, you alluded to the basis of the freeze earlier. These claims of fraud first emerged in Minnesota when a YouTube influencer surveilled a Somali-run childcare center, and we'll be talking more about the specifics of that actually later in the show. But how did we get to this point?
I think, unfortunately, it's the extreme politicization of the administration of federal resources that have happened under this administration, literally since their first week in office, when they first tried to freeze all funding for all federal programs. As they went through a scrutiny process to see if the programs aligned with their specific political ideologies. And that was overturned in the courts as well. So I think it's this extremism that has led to this kind of behavior. And really, the questioning of vulnerable communities who, unfortunately, may not have the same visibility or resources to be able to push back against people like influencers who have, lots of followers and such. But really, the scrutiny should be on them, especially with someone who has previous claims that have been proven to be false. And we know, it's already been over a year of this kind of behavior. We know that these things tend to lead to spurious claims that can gain traction because people use them for their political gain. So we should really press harder on these individuals and hold them accountable, more so than the hardworking childcare providers and families out there just trying to make it out there.
Mm. And really, so there is no evidence. What evidence does the Trump administration have? What are they pointing to justify this freeze?
There's no evidence, especially for the states that they included in this specific five-state decision. To bar these states. It's just political. There are plenty of mechanisms in place for providers and those who receive public funds to make sure that they are doing due diligence and meeting all the requirements to use the funds appropriately.
Yeah. Max, what do you think about how this is all being politicized?
It is absolutely being politicized, and also it's racist. It's very clear. Sorry, yeah, it's very racist. I completely agree with everything that Stacy said. And I would just like to add that also the Trump administration has been systemically targeting the immigrant communities, and in this case, you can see it right there. And that it is very difficult. I've worked with family childcare providers, and the controls in California are extremely tight. In fact, family childcare providers cannot leave their homes if licensing comes, which there's a lot of licensing just comes and catches them not there, they get fined. So to say that there is fraud when there are such tight controls is really false.
hmm And Max, I know there have been reports of harassment against providers, and later in the show again we'll be talking more in depth about how Somali childcare providers are being targeted and even surveilled here in San Diego by perfect strangers. What have you heard from providers across California who are experiencing this firsthand?
Well, just heard from the providers in San Diego as well. Just saw the press conference that they had recently, and there's a lot of fear. And our members, that are not necessarily at this point being affected or have received are all alerted right now, and we have to, as a union, to work with them for them to understand their rights. But it seems at this point that just knowing your rights is not enough with this administration and how far they're pushing the rule of law, just blurring the lines. So it is important for us to continue to build networks and be alert and support each other. So there's a lot of fear right now, and the fear has been there since all of this started last year, and has not stopped. But right now, it's being exacerbated specifically in the Somali community. But our members are feeling it.
Mm. And I know there are already extensive protections in California through the Child Care Providers United union contract. You all struck a deal with the state last year. Can you talk about some of those protections?
Yes, well, there's a lot of protections. For example, if there is anything in a contract called harmless, it's enshrined, the payment based on enrollment and attendance. So, for example, if the administration were to continue to push, even though the rule that they issued states the state may do it differently, may continue to pay based on attendance, but our contract will not allow that because a contract is enshrined. It's enshrined in our contract. Also, our contract has, the rates are locked in our contract, and it would be very difficult for these rates to be lowered by the state of California. But in this case, the attack is not coming from the state of California. The attack is coming from the federal government. So we are standing in support with the state of California in pushing back on these. But providers have many protections in their contract, not only regarding to pay and benefits, but also that have to do with conditions,
Well,
working conditions.
yeah, and Stacy, I also want to ask you about the ripple effects of this freeze on the childcare industry outside of subsidized care. I mean, how can families who don't rely on subsidized childcare also be affected?
Sure. So something to understand about the childcare industry is that it is all very enmeshed within each other, right? There are providers who have a mix of children who are supported by various subsidy opportunities, so that they can either pay low or no rates to be able to have care. And there are families who pay full pay out of pocket, and those are at the same facilities very oftentimes, right? And so it's like the thread of a sweater sort of being pulled. If you eliminate a source of funding or children who are being subsidized and they no longer are able to attend, then that means that there's less resources to pay those providers and keep that business open. And as we said, even if you're a private pay childcare system or center, you are not operating on huge margins. And so this makes everyone vulnerable, and it makes it much harder to have a functioning childcare sector in the state of California, where it's already difficult to operate.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's certainly not lost on me that we're having this conversation at a time when the cost of childcare is skyrocketing. Many San Diego families can barely afford it, as is. How accessible is childcare now at the moment, and what do you see as the domino effect, Stacy?
So, as I mentioned previously, only 14% of eligible families are receiving subsidized care. And there's also a statistic that says 25% of all families of any income level seeking a licensed childcare provider for their infant can find it. So, we really have a structural and systemic lack of adequate, high quality care for all children. And so, that's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about how we, together with our state leaders and others, are strengthening and investing more in this system and not wasting time on these frivolous activities caused by the federal administration that is taking up resources to do unnecessary things that don't help children and families. So that's a great frustration on our part, is that this is actually more wasteful to engage in these policy endeavors that don't help children and families. It actually just wastes resources and time.
Mm. Well, I mean, and speaking of resources and time, the Trump administration is demanding that states submit documentation like attendance records. What information are childcare providers already expected to provide, Stacy?
So depending on their the sources of funding, childcare providers keep meticulous records and a variety of information about the families who are accessing various public funds. So you may have children who are accessing resources relative to Head Start, state preschool, federal child care development funds, TANF through CalWORKs, and other things. So it's a mix. And so, in order to make that work, they take very detailed information about what justifies their eligibility for a variety of programs and then how those are used. And those are reported back to all of the different entities involved in allocating those funds to the provider. I often say it has to be one of the hardest jobs out there is sorting out the records and finances for childcare because it is overly complex. And so all of that data is collected, and now based on what the federal administration is asking for, for the defend the spend activities that are in addition to this 5-state specific action, we're not clear yet. I think we're still awaiting direction from the state on what they would like, and I think there's questions about legality of some of the things that they're asking for in terms of privacy of information, and there's already been federal court decisions related to Head Start when they tried to ask them to collect information on immigration status, and that was turned back by the courts and said you can't do that. So I think there's a lot in flux right now in terms of what that means for providers, and we're asking folks just to stay tuned and wait for information from the state before they have to do anything to make sure we're responding appropriately. And we understand this creates a lot of fear for those in the system. And we're hoping that people are connected and have real-time information so that we can assuage their concerns and respond as we need.
Something you said there makes me want to zoom out a bit here because, as you kind of touched on, other federal funding cuts by the Trump administration have threatened the stability of early childhood care and education. Max, you're also a union leader with the Los Angeles Unified School District. What's your take on how all of these cuts and freezes could impact youth going forward?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, for example, the Medicare, the Medicaid, or the cuts actually to the Affordable Care Act, right, in which have doubled the premiums for many, many, many people, thousands of people, and also the consistent threat of cuts to education that have been happening, and or the threats to voucherized education is something that would affect students in that the privatizing education we know is not the route. And also fear. We just saw in Minnesota how they don't the current administration does not respect schools. They literally went into a high school in Minnesota and tackled a student. And that's something that we live here in LA alert to, in Los Angeles, as well as throughout California. In school districts, as unions, we are forced to organize ourselves and organize our members to be able to protect each other and push back. And these are students there that are not only are they there, they're not receiving the classes they need to receive, but they're also in the middle of an environment of fear. Many students are afraid that when that students that are children of parents that are the undocumented. In this case, it doesn't matter whether you're documented or not. It really matters on what you look like. I'm in fear that the parents may not be there, when they come out. So it's a lot of the policies and the funding, the threats of funding, and when he threatens to cut Medicaid or cut any type of healthcare funding, that affects states' budget, and it also can affect the budget for education and early education, and so we have to continue to organize to push back on these things. Like Stacy said, there is no early education system in the state, or that I know in any state, but we all have been working so hard to make sure that that happens because we understand how important early education is. The science has shown now that it is essential for children to have a leg up to receive early education. And that's really the work that we need to be doing. So it's really, really generating an impact, not only potential financial impact, but a psychological impact on students.
Yeah, indeed, it is traumatizing. Stacy, you also look at early education policy. Do you have anything to add on how all of this might impact children?
Sure. So, I think in our state in particular, we've done a lot of learning and education about the impact of toxic stress on children and adults. Notwithstanding any actual change, the political discourse impacts children's mental health negatively, right? When they hear things that could hurt their family status, when they hear their parents are stressed out about finances, which the overwhelming majority of families with children under the age of 5, I believe it's well over 80%, are experiencing distress about meeting their basic needs and being able to support their families because things are just too expensive, whether it's housing, healthcare challenges, childcare access. All of those things combined are creating a huge amount of distress for families who have young children. And, importantly, when families have young children, they tend to be at their lowest earning potential. And so those things are just much harder when you're starting out. And we should make those things easier for people because it makes sense both for the family economic perspective, but also in nurturing healthy child development, making sure families have good resources, have stability, and are able to nurture their child's well-being without fear and without worrying every month if they can make it happen in terms of meeting their expenses and costs. Is what's going to create the best and strongest California we can have.
Max, looking ahead, how will the union continue to fight for these protections and for families and providers?
Well, we will continue to organize. Like here in California and in other states, we will continue to organize to improve the conditions of providers and expand the care that they give to more students, to more children. As you heard from Stacy, there's a deficit of slots to be able to care for students and educate children that need it and that their families would qualify for the subsidy. So we need to continue to organize and uplift the not just the voices of providers, the people that do the work. Currently in the state of California, family childcare providers are struggling because the cost of caring for the children is not met by the rates that the state provides. And we are continuing on our fight with a lot of allies to push the states to actually achieve what is called the true cost of care, because that is part of building a stable system, and also start to think about how we create a system in which parents have true choice and parents choose what type of care and education their children need, and that then the system wraps around it and is creating an environment in which all children can actually receive early education in any setting that they need. Because there has to be choice. Working families that work 3, 4 jobs need family childcare providers that provide care 24 hours a day or on weekends. So we are going to keep organizing. We will continue to defend against, for example, and continue to, for example, the healthcare fund, in which in these times, as the administration is trying to cut funding for healthcare and many other things, and creating economic crisis. Our members want a contract. They want a healthcare fund so they can continue to have their healthcare. That's part of the union difference. But we will continue to organize. We will continue to create those networks to protect each other and look out for each other's back, and continue to work, here in coalition with organizations such as Stacey's organization.
All
Thank
right,
you.
something we'll continue to follow. I've been speaking with Max Arias, chairperson of Child Care Providers United. Max, thank you. And also Stacy Lee, Chief Learning Officer and Senior Managing Director of Early Childhood at Children Now. Stacy, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, Somali child care centers are being surveilled by strangers as a result of White House rhetoric. Hear more when KPBS Midday Edition returns.
Figuring out the right sport for your kid can feel overwhelming. I'm taking that journey with my son Dorian, exploring different sports and revisiting the fields that I grew up playing. Together, we're searching for the right fit and maybe reconnecting with a few old memories along the way. It's Game Time Decision, a new series from KPBS. Join us at kpbs.org/gametime.
You're listening to KPBS Midday Edition. I'm Jade Hindman. You just heard the latest on the Trump administration's freeze on child care funding to 5 states, including California, and those states' efforts to block it. Here in San Diego, Somali child care providers say strangers are surveilling their centers over alleged fraud. KPBS racial justice and social equity reporter Katie Hyson has been following this story. Katie, welcome.
Hi, Jade.
So, Katie, last week you covered a press conference where Somali child care workers described this surveillance firsthand. In your story, you spoke to one of those providers. What did she say?
She described pulling up to her home with children in her car and seeing 2 young men parked outside her house with a camera. She was scared, so she kept looping the block, hoping they would leave, but they didn't. And she needed to get the kids inside, so she finally braved parking and going in. And she says when they saw her with the children, they pulled away, but the incident really rattled her. Here's how she said it made her feel.
I can't believe that I'm feeling this fearness in here in United States, that I came, all the way down because of my country to fly to here to feel safe. And now I'm feeling this way. I mean, under the Constitution in America, it surprises me.
Sounds terrifying. I mean, how many of these incidents have been reported in San Diego so far?
I spoke with the leader of a domestic workers union who said he was aware of at least 7 incidents, and that was just within a few days last week. And he said there's likely many more that weren't reported out of fear or just not being connected to the union.
Take us back, to when these claims of child care fraud first emerged.
A YouTube influencer began filming Somali-run child care centers in Minnesota, claiming that he was exposing widespread fraud, that they were receiving public funds but not providing care. And he calls himself an independent journalist. The union I spoke with described him as an extremist provocateur. His video went viral, and it's already been debunked, but the Trump administration seems to have really seized on this video, and it's having real ripple effects across the country.
Is this legal?
So states have actual investigations, and they do find instances of childcare fraud by various people, not just Somali providers, of course. But there's no evidence that it's happening on this widespread scale that's being claimed. And these so-called independent investigations, where people are showing up at child care centers, those are not official investigations. They're not following good investigation protocol. It's not solid evidence of anything. And they are sometimes engaging in illegal behavior to do it. So trespassing, harassment, in some cases stalking. I heard one provider being followed to the grocery store.
The fallout from this has been huge. Last week, the Trump administration froze billions in child care funding to 5 Democratic-led states, including California. As of today, all 5 states are suing the government, and a federal judge has temporarily blocked the freeze. But how might all of this impact San Diego families who rely on care provided by these centers?
Mm-hmm. For now, as you said, things are proceeding as normal. But if child care funding were frozen, it could be detrimental to families, especially who rely on that child care to hold down jobs. Here's a parent who spoke at the press conference, Isel Gonzalez.
If I lose my child care, it will make things much harder for me and my family. I have never had a job that understand that I was a mom and sometimes had to take care of my kids. It is even hard to get a day off of work when my kids are sick. What are we gonna do?
How about the local economy? What are the possible ripple effects there?
So as your first guests mentioned, there are more than 100,000 children who receive subsidized childcare in California. So imagine if overnight their parents lose their childcare and they can't go to work. And of course, there are childcare providers who will lose the majority of their clients and may have to close their doors during an already existing care shortage. Here's Gonzalez again.
People will lose their jobs. They could lose their homes and become homeless if they won't have a child care. It is already hard enough providers to pay their bills, stay open. So many providers had to close since the pandemic because they didn't make enough money. To the president, I want to say this: you're putting our families at risk by holding back money.
City Council member Sean Elo Rivera spoke at the same press conference last week about this increased surveillance and harassment on the Somali community. How has he responded?
He says he's really focused on the law enforcement part. He says he'll work with the police department to make sure these incidents are responded to appropriately. And he also had some pretty strong words about how he sees what's happening. Here's what he said.
A weak and failing president decided to choose a clearly vulnerable group as scapegoats and as a distraction from his failures. And that is so wrong. And he chose, and this is what fascists and authoritarians do all over the place, a couple instances of wrongdoing from folks within a group and decided to scapegoat an entire group of people. And there is a definition for that sort of behavior, and it's racism.
Yeah, that last part is really important there. You know, Somali Americans have been a recent target of harassment by the Trump administration. Just last month, the president called Somali immigrants, quote, garbage. And just today, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announced the termination of temporary protected status for Somalia. How are these racist comments, increased surveillance, and immigration raids all snowballing and impacting San Diego's Somali community?
Mm-hmm. It really is a snowballing of a xenophobic rant by the president to very real-world consequences for our Somali neighbors. San Diego's home to the country's second biggest population of Somali refugees after Minnesota. No community is a monolith, but from the people I've spoke with, families are afraid, and they're also resilient, and they're not alone. There are many community leaders and members standing with them right now.
You know, what else has been your takeaway from the community response so far?
I've been encouraged to see how outspoken and clear local officials have been about these incidents, and to see the solidarity from community members. Sam told me she was so afraid that she installed a new security system on her house, and her neighbor noticed and came out to tell her that he and his wife would protect her however they could. And Sam herself, she was reflecting on what would happen if the child care funds were frozen. And she said she would have to get a different job, but she told the parents that until she was hired somewhere, she would watch their children for free. And that's the kind of community generosity and solidarity that I've been seeing during very concerning times.
What's the local union chapter encouraging childcare providers to do in the case they find themselves being watched or surveilled by strangers?
Mm-hmm. They really want providers to call the police and report these incidents as hate crimes, and to make sure that they get an incident report number. And they also want them to report the incidents to the union so that they can better track them and support providers.
What are you following next?
I'm currently investigating new data on racial disparities in who is given a chance at parole in San Diego County. But I have to say, I'll be keeping an eye on this story as well. I actually just saw on my Neighborhoods Next Door group a post from a parent that showed a man filming outside her child's Somali-run daycare center, and he appeared to be wearing a self-made unofficial press badge. And so I don't think this is over yet, and I'll be watching to see if and how the harassment is handled by local law enforcement.
It is definitely terrifying. And of course, we'll continue to follow your reporting, and folks can also follow it at kpbs.org. I've been speaking with KPBS racial justice and social equity reporter Katie Hyson. We'll link to the full story at kpbs.org/midday. Katie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jade.
That's our show for today. I'm your host, Jade Hindman. Thanks for tuning in to Midday Edition. Be sure to have a great day on purpose, everyone.
Stay connected to the world around you. KPBS brings you trusted news, compelling stories, and in-depth reporting every day. Wherever life takes you, KPBS is here, on the radio, online, and on the go. Discover more at kpbs.org.